Next up is Jennifer Smith from the planning staff to talk about the Arlington Mill Community Center.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks.
I'm sorry, Jennifer. Quick question for, I think, our chair. Are there going to be question and answers later about these things?
Yes, let's do all of the presentations and then we'll give them a quick chance.
Great. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Again, I'm here to talk about the Arlington Mill Community Center project, and just to give you some perspective on why we had selected this one, because it's a little less about a siting process and more about building a new facility and introducing an additional use, affordable housing. We did use some innovative tools, so we wanted to walk you through that history. This is a mixed-use project, community center, affordable housing, and retail, and we had a joint development partnership between the county and private developers. So as you can see here from the timeline above, the process to achieve the new center took many years to accomplish. And while we would say that it demonstrates success and innovation because it ventured into new territory with the partnership and using a new zoning tool, form-based code, there were many learning opportunities over time, and so that added time to the project schedule. I'm going to walk you through the history chronologically and try to give you some additional context of what was happening during that time. Before the county acquired the site, it was occupied by a grocer. The 1.9-acre site is located just at the intersection of Dinwiddie and Columbia Pike, just west of 4 Mile Run Drive. As you can see in the photo, it's was at that time as a typical commercially zoned property, single-story development, a large surface parking area. And although the county didn't have a definite long-term plan, it did see the benefit of looking to acquire the property when it became available. Once it was acquired, the county did make interior renovations to accommodate classrooms and other activity rooms to support primarily school functions. It was envisioned early on that the school would occupy the space for some time, but eventually it would be converted to a full-use community center. However, the school uses did last at the site for a little longer than what was originally planned. Once it was acquired, the county and schools were both in alignment and discussed a joint facility with approximately 50% of the space for each of the main tenants. The site was rezoned from a commercial zoning to S3A, and it was changed to public on our land use plan. There were use permits approvals established for adult ed, preschool, after school, and those ran until the mid-2000s when the new center was in place. During this time, the Columbia Pike community was in the midst of planning process to develop the Columbia Pike Initiative. I'm sure many of you are aware of the history of that. The plan was calling for revitalization of the corridor. Describing a vision that would bring new opportunities for private development and bringing new county services, so it was a complete community and people wouldn't have to travel outside of the Columbia Pike corridor to kind of meet your everyday needs. This particular site was called for in the Columbia Pike Initiative Plan as a focal point because at that point, again, we owned the site and we were really looking as this was a central place where the community could come together. Around this time, the county and APS staff were discussing different programs, how those pieces could be occupying the space, and how different service providers could come in and use the facility as well. But as the discussions were proceeding, and based on the population and the different needs and demands in the facility, there was discussion that definitely a new facility would have to be larger than the one that existed today. So based on that body of work, the board then, by 2004, established a more formal working group, the Arlington Mill Steering Committee. And that group had representatives from the Pike community, CPRO, which is the Columbia Pike Revitalization Organization, school facilities staff, and others. And the local chair, Linda LeDuc, was working closely with staff. The board had set up a charge for this group to develop schematic designs, working with a professional architect, looking at the programming work that had been done earlier, and then give input in terms of the finishes on the building, et cetera. However, a little bit later, though, there was a decision that we really hadn't gotten far enough along, and the schools decided that they were no longer going to be part of a joint development. So the county was left with faced with a decision of whether to proceed, and if so, how. So it's important to note that around this time, public-private partnerships were enabled at the state level, and the county was already working on another arrangement at the Shirlington Library and parking garage with a private developer. So there was interest at the county level and the county board level that perhaps partnerships could be a way to achieve the new center with little to no cost to the county. So that would take us really to sort of the next phase that I'm going to talk about, this mixed-use development proposal, where the county would pursue design and construction for the community center without school uses. Again, at this time, keep in mind the form-based code, the zoning tool of our preference for Columbia Pike was already being used. Some new development projects were getting approved. And this really drove the notion that you could achieve more on the land than just solely a community center. Affordable housing was front and center for the county at this time. There was little to no committed affordable housing on the Pike, and so this was identified as a possible additional use, creating a mixed-use building. That led to developer being interested in submitting a proposal to show how they could actually develop the site, bring the new community center and housing, but it didn't bore out that the county wouldn't have any financial responsibility. But the county, that did lead the county to pursue a public-private partnership RFQ, and something went out on the street to seek interest from other developers. But all of the proposals came back in indicating that the county was going to need to make the funds available to help build the community center. So by mid-2007, the county had funding in place already and had selected Public-Private Alliances as a partner, who was a subsidiary of Clark. And that really kicked off what I would say a pretty intensive effort to sort out not only the project design, but also the deal and how the use of county land would be an integral piece of the project. We were working closely with the steering committee, but also with others, including the form-based code working group, to use that tool to help shape the building. Since that tool was going to, in theory, allow for a streamlined review process since so many standards were in place, however, this was the first civic building to be built down on Columbia Pike, and so there were some things that had to be tested, and of course that led to a longer duration. So ultimately, at that time, the project was approved. That's in 2008. It was a 6-story facility. We're talking about 40,000 square feet of community center, including the gymnasium, a public plaza, and a small amount of retail on the Columbia Pike frontage. And that building had 3 stories of residential above. Then there was a second building to the back, a 5-story residential building with a mix of market rate and affordable units, 61 affordable units that would be available at 60% AMI and below. Unfortunately, the downturn of the market occurred at this time after we had approved the project and the private developer was going after public finance or going after financing, and the project was really not able to be funded and had to be abandoned. So the county dissolved the ground lease with this entity, but then didn't want to lose the opportunity to build what it had committed to for so many years. So this is going to take us to the third phase of this process, whereby in December of 2009, again, the board remained committed to the project and decided to fund building the community center first as phase one, and later, when the housing could be determined, that could be provided on the balance of the site. The county went through a process to redesign the community center and removed, obviously, the residential from the upper floors. The center's square footage was increased, but overall the building, its total mass was decreased. The plaza remained virtually the same. In the midst of changing this building design, the county asked the question, are there or is there another use, other uses that should be considered before we finalize these details? And one idea was to move the Columbia Pike Library. But this idea was really fraught with neighborhood concerns about shifting it several blocks from its location on Walter Reed Drive, and the idea was abandoned. So by June 2010, the county is issuing an RFP to get a new housing partner. In the meantime, the county's reviewing the revised community center design, and the community center grew at its approval, and now what's built, grew from about 40,000 square feet to approximately 63,000 square feet. It changed in height from 6 stories to 5 stories, and the retail was about the same, the plaza was about the same. The project follows the form-based code, the 2 frontage types that are called for there, and provides parking underneath, actually both the community center and the housing piece. The second phase of this, APA, Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing, had reached the successful selection process for the county's RFP for their proposal to build the Arlington Mill residences. And that would deliver about a 99% affordable housing project with 122 units. The building design changed, but it remained as a form-based code compliant project, which enabled a streamlined review process. The building changed from 159 units to 122, and from 5 stories to 4 stories. It's important to note that the county's contribution to this phase of the project was the land value, which allowed the project to move forward without requiring any of the AHIF dollars, the Affordable Housing Investment Fund. And APA was, of course, using low-income housing tax credits to help fund the project. So this notion of using the ground lease and also the joint the co-location with the community center and building over a parking garage really enabled some cost savings, which in turn went towards the affordable housing units. You can see here the community center that opened in 2013. This views from Columbia Pike across the plaza and shows the center and its gymnasium, which is the lower building on the right. And this is the Arlington Mill Residences 4-story apartment building. And the project includes units available to renters with incomes at or below 60% AMI, and with some units as supportive housing, which are serving people at much lower income levels. So just to point out a few of the lessons learned here for this project is, first, that it was an opportunistic acquisition, but in an area where early ideas for revitalization were occurring, making it a good decision, even though not all details were in place. The form-based code also established the building and site framework, which helped shape decisions and gave the basis for the ultimate design. So that gave a framework on what the community had already said they were looking for from a building form perspective. The project was supported over a long duration by the steering committee. They remained committed to the project and pushed the county over that history time and time again. We need to get this project completed. It's good for the community. It's necessary. They were there to complement the staff resources and helped as a sounding board at key junctures. And they remained intact even through the permitting and the construction phases to provide input on final design elements. I'd say one of probably the most important thing here is persistence. And also to remain flexible and open to changing dynamics, circumstances, and new ideas over that time. They're bound to come up with any land deal, and particularly one where the county or public entity is also in the mix. Another key piece, when the community center was redesigned, the board felt it was important to go ahead and build a building almost under its full potential under the form-based code allowed heights. So they funded a building that had space for future expansion. So if anybody's been in the building and you bypass one of the floors, there's opportunity to expand into an additional level on Columbia Pike, and once funding's in place, we'll be able to fully use the building. Even though the housing would be phased in over time, I talked a little bit about this before, but to achieve a single parking garage, that was certainly a benefit to the residences project. It also gave some efficiencies and ease of layout for anybody coming to the parking area, whether for the community center or residences. So while I would say that this is a creative project, helping make it cost-effective, and it certainly helped attract and achieve the low-income housing tax credits. It was helpful in that sense in leveraging other outside dollars. These kind of partnerships are something that the county has continued to look at, but applying lessons that we've learned here, and some of those include a DHS housing facility at the Gable site plan in the courthouse area recently, and it's being contemplated as a partnership to rebuild the fire station number 10 in the Roslyn area. So while these partnerships can yield successful outcomes, it's critical to understand that they're very complex and they take time. They need sufficient time to work out the project details and to work out the deal, such as how to use the value in the ground lease. You need a good development partner. And in some cases, it's going to take more density than what we could offer on Columbia Pike for the county to significantly reduce its funding responsibilities. And lastly, you certainly need community support for the vision and to be there with you through the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.